I invite you to turn with me in your Bibles to the book of Ruth. We continue our study in Ruth by looking at the 3rd chapter this morning. There's a wonderful hymn that we sing sometimes, and it goes this way: "Redeemed, how I love to proclaim it. Redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. Redeemed through his infinite mercy. His child, and forever I am." It's a wonderful hymn of our faith. But what does it actually mean to be redeemed? We don't really use that term much in our culture today of ourselves. We might talk of redeeming things. We talk of perhaps redeeming coupons at the grocery store, redeeming rewards points on a credit card. You talk about, I redeemed myself when I messed something up, but then I made up for it, so I redeemed myself, right? But what is redemption from the Bible's perspective? How does God, what is involved in this idea of being redeemed? Am I like a frequent flyer mile on Jesus' American Airlines rewards card that he had to redeem in order to get some kind of perks? I don't think so. We need to be careful that we don't let concepts like redemption become simply biblical jargon that we use to talk about our faith without really letting the truth of that concept invade our hearts. Fortunately, today's study in Ruth chapter 3 gives us the perfect opportunity to stop and ask ourselves the question, what really does it mean to have a redeemer? Ruth talks to us about this idea of a redeemer, and if we can let the answer to that question get into our hearts, get into our bloodstream, so to speak, if we can see how the qualities of a redeemer are exemplified here in Ruth chapter 3, I'm convinced that we will truly see the beauty of what God has done for us in Jesus Christ, and we will find real motivation for living in relationship with Him day by day. I want to start off asking this question. We're talking about resting in a redeemer, and I want to start off asking that question: what does it really mean to have a redeemer? And if you remember from the last time we were together looking at Ruth, we studied chapter 2, and at the end of that chapter, remember in chapter 2, Ruth goes out into the fields to pick up scraps of the wheat and barley to be able to provide for herself and her mother-in-law, Naomi, because they are destitute, they are poor, and they have no way of providing for themselves. But God had provided a way in the land of Israel in that time that the poor people could go out into the fields and they could collect the scraps in the fields after the field owners and their servants had gone through and reaped those fields. And so Ruth goes out into the fields and she finds favor in the eyes of a guy named Boaz. Boaz, a godly man who showed amazing kindness to her, amazing Christ-likeness to her. And as she gets home with tons more barley harvested than what would have been expected for a poor person gathering the scraps in those days, Boaz made sure to send her home with more than she needed. As she gets home, her mother-in-law Naomi recognizes the blessing that has been given to her, and she says, "May this man, Boaz, be blessed by the Lord." And she also said to her, this is in Ruth chapter 2, verse 20, Naomi also said to Ruth, "This man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers," or the NIV says kinsman redeemers. And so she introduces this concept of a kinsman redeemer. And the Bible talks in the Old Testament about this role, the role of a kinsman redeemer. That's where we're going to begin today. What was a kinsman redeemer supposed to do? Well, in the Old Testament, especially the book of Leviticus, we see some of the things that the kinsman redeemer was supposed to provide. He was supposed to provide a place in the land. Let me turn your attention to Leviticus 25, beginning with verse 25. Here's what it says. "If your brother becomes poor and sells part of his property, then his nearest redeemer," there's that word, kinsman redeemer, "shall come and redeem what his brother has sold. If a man has no one to redeem it, then himself becomes prosperous and finds sufficient means to redeem it, to buy it back, let him calculate the years since he sold it and pay back the balance to the man to whom he sold it, then return to his property. You see, there's this idea in the law that God provided for his people in the Old Testament. There's this idea that the land that was given to you as a part of your family line would always stay with your family line, because the promises of God to his people were so closely tied to their place in the land. When God spoke to Israel's forefather, Abraham, he said to Abraham, I'm going to lead you into a place that I will show you, and that is where I will give you a land, I will make you prosperous, I will bless you, and I will give you many descendants, which became the Israelite nation. And he says, and I will make you a blessing, so that all the nations of the world will be blessed through you. And so God, in fulfilling that promise to Abraham, he creates a way for the people of Israel, even when they become destitutely poor and they have to sell their land, their inheritance, their stake in God's promises. This is their piece of God's promises to them as a nation. Even if they have to sell that, God provided a way for a kinsman, one of their relatives, to buy that land back so that they would have that inheritance to continue on. I think it's hard for us to fully understand the importance of the land to the nation of Israel, the importance of the actual geography that they were inhabiting. It was a fulfillment of God's promise to them, and therefore God provided a way for it to continue for all generations. And he did it through this kinsman redeemer. Now, this kinsman redeemer would also provide restoration to freedom. Let me continue looking at Leviticus 25. Later on, in verses 47 to 55, it says this: If a stranger or sojourner with you becomes rich, and your brother, in other words, your Israelite person beside you, becomes poor and sells himself to the stranger or sojourner with you, or to a member of his clan, then after he's sold, he may be redeemed. One of his brothers may redeem him. So there's this idea of buying back from slavery, actually. Now, slavery in an Old Testament context was very different from what we experienced here in America, American slavery, which was based on race and that sort of thing. This is actually having to do more with indebtedness. If you got yourself in debt so far you couldn't pay it off, you would actually commit yourself as a slave to that person in order to pay off that debt. But that slavery could also be paid by the Redeemer, a kinsman who would come along and buy you back, give you your freedom once again. This goes along with the idea of God's promise to his people being fulfilled for all generations. God is making a way for his people to experience the blessing of his promise, even when they screw up, even when they get themselves in over their heads, and they have to sell themselves off to somebody else to try and pay back their debts. When they have to sell their land to pay back their debts. God is providing a way for them to be bought back, to be redeemed, to be given that place in the promise, to be assured that promise for all generations. There's another thing listed in the Old Testament that the kinsman redeemer would do. He would provide justice for the family. In the book of Numbers, we're not going to go through and read everything, but I encourage you can write it down and check it out later. In the book of Numbers, we see how a kinsman could accept payment on behalf of a deceased relative. So if someone in the family dies, but someone owed that person something, their kinsman, redeemer, could accept that repayment on their behalf. Or another thing a kinsman could do is to actually execute a murderer. So if someone came and murdered a member of the family, then the kinsman would go and find that person and see that justice was done on them. And God provides, in the book of Numbers there, he talks about these sanctuary cities, these cities of refuge, that if somebody accidentally murdered somebody and the kinsman was coming after them to exact vengeance on them, they could run to this city of refuge, and they would be safe there until the high priest could be the sort of judge to hear the case and to make a decision one way or the other. This is God providing a system of justice in a place, in a land where there wasn't judges and a whole justice system and police, that were sent to arrest somebody and all that kind of thing. Everything was very clan and family oriented. And so it was up to the members of the family, it was up to the kinsman redeemer to actually go and see that justice was done for that murdered family member. There's one more thing that we see in the Bible that a family member was called to do, and it's not necessarily directly tied to the Leviticus or Deuteronomy instructions for the kinsman redeemer, that exact word, but it became a part of that role through time, and I think we'll see why in just a second here. But this other concept was one of marriage. The kinsman redeemer came to be a person who would provide marriage and therefore a continuation of family line. What do I mean by that? Take a look at Deuteronomy 25. Deuteronomy 25, verses 5 to 10. Here's what it says. If brothers dwell together and one of them dies and has no son, the wife of the dead man shall not be married outside the family to a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go in to her and take her as his wife and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. And the first son whom she bears shall succeed to the name of his dead brother, so that his name may not be blotted out of Israel. Do you see how this concept of the next of kin marrying the widow that hasn't had any children, marrying her, and then the first son bearing the name of the deceased, you see how this ties into the concept of preserving a family line in the land? And this is why it became tied to this idea of a kinsman redeemer. Again, God is providing a way for his people so that even if they don't have any sons to carry on their family name, that line, there is one who is called to step in and have that child, a surrogate father in some sense, have that child with the mother so that the family line can be continued. In all of these things, the whole thing about the role of the kinsman redeemer, it's all about making sure that God's promises to his people are continued for all of time. In spite of human brokenness, in spite of human wickedness, even in and through all of that, God provides a way in the Old Testament system for that promise to be fulfilled for generation after generation. And so as we come to the book of Ruth, it shouldn't surprise us that we start hearing this terminology of kinsman redeemer. Because what has happened? Naomi and Ruth are coming back to the land without any children, without any place in the land. They don't own any property. They have no stake in the promises of God in a physical sense. They have no children to carry on the family name. And so God's promises are in jeopardy here. What will happen to the family line of Elimelech? What will happen? Will his name be blotted out forever? Will God's promises to him be voided and forgotten? God provides a kinsman redeemer. And the redeemer, in this sense, in the biblical sense, being redeemed looks like being bought back from slavery, given a home, a share in God's promises, along with justice, continued family line, and hope for the future. And if God set aside the specific role of kinsman redeemer to accomplish this task, how do we see it exemplified here in Ruth? Well, let's point out just a few things. First of all, I have to admit, Ruth chapter 3 contains a lot of stuff that sounds very strange to us, doesn't it? There's like the sneaking out at night, uncovering his feet, and all this what is going on here? Well, we're not going to have time to unpack. We're not going to have time to unpack all of the cultural things at play here, because there's a lot of stuff going on that people back in that day reading the story would have been like, oh yeah, of course you had to do it that way. And there's some stuff that they would have taken for granted that doesn't always make sense to us. We'll try to touch on a few of those things. But the bottom line is, this chapter is about Ruth going out and putting the cards on the table, so to speak, and saying, we need a kinsman redeemer to step up and do all of those things for us that we just saw in the last slide, to provide a place in this land, to provide a continuation of the family line, to provide justice for us. So the first thing we see here is the need for redemption. Naomi comes to Ruth and says, my daughter, should I not seek rest for you so that it may be well with you? Naomi recognized that Ruth and she had received provision from Boaz throughout the barley harvest. Okay, this was about a month and a half long process from sort of April to late May, early June. All right? This is the barley harvest, and Boaz had been providing lavishly for their needs during that time. But Naomi comes to Ruth, and this is now the end of the barley harvest, and Naomi's saying, we need a permanent provision. Not just throughout the barley harvest. We need something that's going to be permanent and lasting. And you notice Naomi isn't talking about herself at all here. She says, my daughter, should I not seek rest for you? Should I not try to provide for you so that it may be well with you? And her solution is to say, go to this man who is our relative, our kinsman, redeemer. And she talks about how Ruth is to go about doing it. This is where some of the cultural stuff comes in that doesn't make sense at first light to us. She says, wash, anoint yourself, put on your cloak, go down to the threshing floor. There's this kind of preparation, making herself attractive to him, sort of hedging her bets, trying to make things the perfect situation for asking Boaz to fulfill his duty as their kinsman redeemer. Let me ask this question. Why didn't Boaz initiate this? If Boaz shows himself to be so kind to Ruth, and if he shows himself to be so willing to provide for her and for Naomi, why didn't he, the man, in that culture especially, the man isn't the one in charge, right? And he's the one that initiates. He's the one that goes out and makes the proposal. Why does Ruth have to do it? Well, scholars speculate different reasons, and one that makes sense to me is perhaps actually Boaz is respecting Ruth's time of mourning. You see here when Naomi's instructions, wash yourself, anoint yourself, put on your cloak, all this kind of stuff. It could be that up until that point, Ruth had been wearing the garb, the cloak of mourning for her husband who had passed. And so it would have been inappropriate for Boaz to come up to her in the field and say, hey, you want to get married to me? I mean, you can hear how ridiculous that sounds, even in our culture. But it could be that this wash yourself, put on perfume and your cloak and everything is a sort of a putting off of the mourning clothes and a putting on of the cloak to keep warm at night and the washing and everything. One of those possible reasons. But the bottom line is, even in those days, it would have been strange for a woman to go and propose to the man, to ask for him to redeem her. And so Naomi gives her instructions on how to do this, how to do it in a way that's not going to bring shame on her or shame to Boaz, not going up to him in front of everyone else and putting him on the spot, but going to him at night under the cover of darkness and presenting this request to him. And Ruth obeys. Ruth says to her, all that you say, I will do. Verse 5. All that you say, I will do. But Ruth, it's amazing how Ruth interacts with Boaz. She went down to the threshing floor, did just as her mother-in-law commanded her. When Boaz had eaten and drunk, his heart was merry. He went down to lie at the end of the heap of grain. He went to lie on the far side of the grain to protect it, perhaps from animals that might come and try to eat it in the middle of the night, or from thieves that would come and try to steal it. He's lying down to protect the crop. And it says, when all this happened, she came softly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. At midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman was laying at his feet. Unusual, for sure. Unusual. And in those days and in that culture, it may not have been too uncommon, actually, for prostitutes to come out into the fields and to seek to make some money while the harvesters were out there enjoying their feast and everything at the end of the harvest time. Boaz shows himself here to be a godly man, yet again, just as he did in chapter 2. He merely asks her, "Who are you?" He doesn't seek to take advantage of her. He's startled, perhaps because the uncovering of his legs caused the cool breeze to wake him up or something like that. People sometimes read too much into that whole uncovering the legs thing. There's really no hint in here of any kind of sexual or dirty thing happening here. Everything here, the narrator is trying to help us to see both Ruth and Boaz are upright people who love God and are seeking to do things his way. Boaz says, "Who are you?" And she answers, "I am Ruth, your servant." Now spread, in the NIV it says, "Spread the corner of your cloak over me." That word, cloak, can also mean wings. And there's beautiful ambiguity to that word. It can mean both things at the same time. And so in one sense, she's saying, spread your cloak over me. You're not the only one who's shivering here. I need protection. I need that spreading of the cloak over me. In those days, in that culture, a spreading of a cloak, a giving of a piece of clothing was a sign of engagement. You might remember from last week when Dan Allen was here speaking with us about his trips to India and how he made a cultural mistake in giving a piece of like a scarf kind of lei that they had given him. He gave it to one of the young ladies there because he said, "I don't need this thing, if I take it back to my hotel room, it'll start to stink or whatever." So he thought he was being nice giving it to her, but in their culture, just as in ancient culture, that giving of the cloak, of the piece of clothing, is a sign of engagement. And so all the ladies around him began to laugh and say, you just asked her to be your wife. Same kind of thing in this culture. When she says, "Spread your cloak over me," there's no doubt in Boaz's mind. She's asking him to marry her, to redeem her, to provide that thing that the kinsman redeemer was called upon. And she says, "Spread your cloak or spread your wings over me because you are a redeemer, a kinsman redeemer." Interestingly enough, that word, like we said, it could mean cloak, it could mean wings. Earlier in chapter 2, Boaz recognized that Ruth was seeking to find shelter under the wings of God. In chapter 2, verse 12, Boaz says to Ruth, "May the Lord repay you for what you have done in being kind to Naomi, and a full reward be given to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Boaz recognized that Ruth was a woman of faith who is seeking to find refuge under God's wings. And now she's saying to Boaz, "Spread your wings over me. You are the one that God is going to use to provide protection." It's a pretty bold move on Ruth's part. What is the response? How does Boaz respond to this? And he said, verse 10, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, and that you have not gone after younger men, whether poor or rich. Boaz is recognizing, even in the face of Ruth's sort of bold, in-your-face kind of pronouncement, I'm seeking redemption from you. Boaz sort of turns back on her as if it really is up to her. She could have gone after anybody else, but she comes to him, and he says, this is a great kindness. It's greater than the kindness that you showed first to Naomi in staying with her, making her people your people and her God your God. Boaz shows great willingness to be that redeemer. You see at the end near the end of the chapter, verse 14, it says, she lay at his feet until morning, but before anyone could recognize each other, she arose. And he said, let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. And he said, bring that garment you're wearing and hold it out. She held it out. He measured out 6 measurements of barley and put it on her. And then later on, Ruth says, these 6 measures of barley he gave me because he said, you must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law. Again, showing his willingness to provide, to protect her. That giving barley to her before she goes home to Naomi could have actually been seen as sort of a wedding gift, because it was often the case that a fiancé, a husband, the groom, would give a gift to the parents of the woman that he was proposing to. Boaz shows great willingness. He shows great righteousness in caring for her honor and saying, stay here, and don't go back yet until I can give you a gift. Also saying, let it not be known that a woman came to the threshing floor. He's protecting her honor in the sight of others around her. And he shows great diligence. It says there, he says, remain tonight. In the morning, if this other person, okay, I need to back up for a sec here. I need to back up. Part of Boaz's righteousness that he displays here. He says, now, your kindness is greater than the first. You've not gone after young men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, verse 11, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask. For all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. Now it's true, I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight. In the morning, if he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if not, if he's not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until the morning. How does this show Boaz's righteousness? Well, he was honoring, he knew, even though he was willing, and he wanted to redeem her himself, he knew that there was another closer than him. There was another relative that was closer than him. And so, as a righteous, God-fearing man, he knows that what he must do is go to that other man first and give him the opportunity first. Not only does this show great righteousness, but it also introduces tension to the story. What's going to happen? Is this other guy going to get Ruth? We don't know anything about the other guy. We don't know if he's a righteous man. He hasn't shown the kind of kindness that Boaz has. What's God going to do through this? Boaz protects Ruth, but he also honors this other closer relative by saying, I need to go talk to him first. And then, when they get up early in the morning before there's enough light for people to recognize each other, he says, here, let me give you a gift to take back to your mother. And look at the end of verse 15. If you're reading one of the Bibles in the seat in front of you, the NIV, it says he measured 6 measures of barley and put it on her, and then he went into the city. The ESV that I'm reading from that says, then she went into the city. So which one is it? Well, they both went back in. The older manuscripts actually say he went into the city. The older manuscripts say that, and I think it speaks to his diligence. It speaks to the fact that Boaz was eager to accomplish this redemption for her. And the reason I think that is the better translation here is because we see indication of that eagerness later on when Naomi says, the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today. Naomi recognizes his eagerness, his willingness to redeem. And then when you see the very first verse of chapter 4, now Boaz had already gone up to the gate and sat down there. What happened between Boaz going up to the gate and sitting down there and putting the grain onto Ruth to send her home? Well, he went into the city. Boaz shows willingness, righteousness. He shows diligence in fulfilling this role of the Redeemer. And what is the result? What's the result for Ruth and Naomi? Well, when Ruth gets back, she tells her mother-in-law everything that happens. She shows her the gift that Boaz sent, and Naomi replies, wait, my daughter. Wait until you learn how the matter turns out. Kind of the idea of sit tight. Your Redeemer is going into town on your behalf. He will fight for you. He will accomplish what you cannot accomplish for yourself. It's in his hands now. So wait. Sit tight. Isn't it true that often the hardest times are waiting times for us? It's hard to wait. It's hard to wait for test results to come back from the doctor. It's hard to wait for that paycheck sometimes. Because the bills don't care when the paycheck is coming. It's hard to wait for that loved one you've been praying for to come to know Jesus. And just want to do something, want to make it happen. Many times we can't make something happen. And Naomi says here, wait. Wait until you learn how the matter will turn out. It's out of our hands. The waiting in this case is made easier by knowing the character and the willingness of the Redeemer, isn't it? This isn't just, well, it's a coin toss, let's see what happens. This is, no, there is a man that has shown great willingness, and he has told you that he is going to go and settle the matter, and he's going to do it today. He's not going to rest until it's done. So you can rest. You can rest in the knowledge that your Redeemer is there fighting for you. To be sure, Boaz gives us quite an example of God's ideal for the kinsman Redeemer here in Ruth chapter 3. But we cannot leave here today without letting this example point our eyes forward toward the ultimate Redeemer that God would provide for all of us in Jesus Christ. What does our Redeemer look like? Well, if the kinsman Redeemer was supposed to provide a place in the land, our Redeemer, the ultimate Redeemer, Jesus, promises to prepare a place for us in heaven in John 14:2, and to give us an inheritance that can never perish, never spoil, never fade. We find that in 1 Peter 1:4. If the kinsman Redeemer was supposed to provide restoration to freedom, our ultimate Redeemer, Jesus, provides freedom from captivity to sin and death itself. We find that in Romans chapter 6, verses 17 to 18. If the kinsman Redeemer was supposed to provide justice for the family, our ultimate Redeemer, Jesus, has been given authority to judge the nations, we find in John chapter 5, verse 27. And a day is coming when he will provide ultimate, final justice for all. If the kinsman Redeemer provided marriage and a continuation of the family line, our ultimate Redeemer, Jesus, is even now calling people from all tribes and all tongues and peoples and nations to come and join in the final wedding banquet feast, where his bride, the church, will be perfectly united to him in a relationship of loving faithfulness for all of time. Marriages point forward to that final union of us with Christ our Savior. The Bible says that marriage is meant to be a picture of Christ and his church. And so just as Ruth goes to Boaz and says, spread your wings over me, redeem me, marry me so that this line may be continued, we run to Jesus and we say, we need you. We need you to spread your wings over us, to take us into your family, not because of how great we are, but because of how great your love and your willingness is to us. Just like Boaz, our Redeemer Jesus showed himself to be willing, powerful, and diligent to accomplish his work of redemption. When he was on earth, the Bible says he set his face like flint toward the cross. Nothing could deter him from accomplishing that redemption that God had sent him here to do. But unlike Boaz, here's where the illustration breaks down. Jesus did not need to defer to a closer relative. Jesus is the firstborn over all creation. And he has the power and authority given him by the Father to work and to accomplish his work of redemption. Also, unlike Boaz, our ultimate Redeemer, Jesus, did not wait for us to sneak out to him in the middle of the night and pull back the cloak so that he would wake up and notice us. The Bible says, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Even while we were God's enemies, he brought us close. That's the kind of Redeemer that Boaz points forward to, but could never do it perfectly. Only Jesus does it perfectly. He came to us and redeemed us even as his enemies. So then what is our response? Our response needs to be that of Ruth. To run to our willing, able Redeemer and to rest in his finished work. If Ruth, the outsider from Moab, could rest in the knowledge that her kinsman Redeemer was willing and able to go through any legal means necessary to accomplish her redemption, establishing not only her place in the land, but also provision and protection for her life, how much more should we, unworthy outsiders from America, South Korea, Zimbabwe, Kenya, Myanmar, India, wherever we're from, we, the unworthy outsiders, can rest in the fact that we have a greater and ultimate Redeemer who is not only willing but totally able to pay the price to buy us back from our slavery to sin and death, to give us not just hope and provision for this life, but an eternal dwelling which he is preparing for us, even now. Folks, this is the place from which we live out the Christian life. As we look to our perfect Redeemer and marvel at the way that he did not rest until he had settled the matter of buying us back from our own sinful, selfish attempts at being our own God. As we see the way that he accomplished this purchase, not with money, but with his own life, his own blood. It's only then that we see the real beauty of what Christ has done for us. It's only then that we find the motivation to live lives of surrender to him. Let's be people who open our eyes in a fresh way to the work on our behalf of the perfect Redeemer, Jesus Christ. Let's be people who live for him out of the freedom, hope, joy, and rest that this knowledge brings, because we know that Jesus really was telling the truth when he hung on that cross and when he said, "It is finished." Our redemption has been accomplished. Amen? Amen. Let's pray. Father, we ask that you would, by the power of your Holy Spirit, drive these truths home in our hearts so that we might live lives of surrender to you, not because we're trying to become good enough, but because we see the power of what you have done for us. We see the incredible love that you have shown us in purchasing us back, giving us a place in your family, giving us hope for the future. Lord, let us live for you and follow you in everything, and rest in the knowledge that you are mighty to save us. In Jesus' name, amen.